Hello, my name's Clabe Pearson. This is my brother Tommy Pearson. This is my wife Luann, Tommy's wife Jackie, and Tommy and Jackie's daughter Natalie. And we're from the San Simon Ranch in the southeastern part of the county. And we're here to just give a little history on this county, or this ranch. The ranch was originally established by a man named Frank Drivers. He purchased it in the fall of 1984. He was a native of Missouri, and he drove 1,200 head of longhorn cattle out of West Texas, past Hobbs, to Monument Springs, rested there and watered them and grazed them, and then he took them to his destination, which was Doug Springs. It was the name of the San Simon Ranch at that time. These springs had been discovered by a man named William Shafter. He was a colonel in the cavalry, and he discovered it in 1875, and he's the one that gave him the name. It was some hand-dug wells by the Indians there in that area. Mr. Drivers, he arrived at the springs with his herd and found the location was already claimed by two buffalo hunters. And he offered them, these guys' names was Lewis and Guyot Faulkner. And he offered them $250 in gold for their claim, and which they accepted, and that thus became the Doug Springs Ranch. And during most of 1885, Mr. Drivers and his cowboys that he had at that time built a permanent house for the ranch. And we'll skip to the next page. I guess I should mention these writings here were done by my mother, and mine and Tommy's mother, probably sometime in the 1990s.
What's her name?
Her name was Billy E. Pearson. So anyway, they built a house, and the foundation is still visible. The original foundation is still visible of that old house. Is caliche rocks and mud. And soon after, the Doug Springs Ranch became the TAX Ranch, which was Mr. Driver's cattle brand. It was a T on the shoulder, A on the ribs, and X on the hip. And then in 1889, the ranch was located in what was known as Lincoln County at the time. And in 1889, the legislature of the state of New Mexico divided Lincoln into three parts, which was Lincoln County and Eddy and Chaves County. So prior to being Lee County, the ranch was in Eddy County. And then our ancestors, which would have been mine and Tommy's great-great-grandfather, correct? Colonel C.W. Merchant and his partner, Colonel J.H. Paramore, bought the tax ranch from Mr. Drivers, and that was in 1897. And this contract gave the Merchant and Paramore ranch grazing rights to all the land between the Pecos River on the west and the 84 ranch on the east, which I'm not exactly sure, Tommy.
It's right there east of their headquarters, was just east of Eunice, about where the 84 ranch headquarters was just east of Eunice, about where the intersection of Highway 18, which is the Hobbs-Jow Highway, and 176, like you're headed out towards Andrews. It was right in that area. And so, and their east fence, was, the way I understand it, was right there at Eunice.
So basically they grazed from Eunice to Carlsbad. And then to stock this ranch, Mr. Paramore and Mr. Merchant brought cattle from a ranch that they had in Arizona. It was near a little river called the San Simon River, and by a little town of the same name, and that's how the name of the San Simon came to be. Then in 1902, Mr. Paramore and Mr. Merchant dissolved their partnership, and Mr. Paramore took the ranch in Arizona, and Mr. Merchant took the ranch here in Lee County. And they built a large two-story house on the ranch headquarters in 1903. And that house burned down in July of 1936, and then they hired a Mexican man named Pearl, by the history we have, to build the new house made of adobe bricks right from the ranch. And so now it's an adobe house, which still stands today. The C.W. Merchant and Sons was incorporated in 1911 and renamed the Merchant Livestock Company, which it is still in existence today. Tommy and I manage the ranch, or we do the general day-to-day to work on the ranch. Jackie and Luann are pretty much the ones that manage the ranch, but it's still owned. It's still owned by the Merchant descendants to this day. So I would venture to say it may be the oldest incorporated family business in the state of New Mexico, being incorporated in 1911. So, haven't researched that, but I would like to be able to research that sometime. So.
It was a wonderful experience.
Okay, so elaborate.
Just the heritage, learning the history of the ranch was wonderful.
And what about the skills that you had to learn growing up on the ranch?
That's one of them. Get up early and just learn how to work hard. Whatever they needed done, they'd let me help.
It's really wonderful. It really is. It's a wonderful place or a wonderful lifestyle to raise children in. They learn a wonderful work ethic and learn a lot about loyalty and just good family values that I fear are being lost, today. But I grew up in the city, so it was new to me, but I'm proud to say now I've been on the ranch longer than I was ever in the city, so that's a good thing. Yeah.
Did you have culture shock?
Yeah, I have a great story. Right after we came home from our honeymoon, the next weekend after we got home, my parents came over and brought the rest of my things, and Clabe and I had chosen to put a little trailer house in the very northeast corner of the ranch, just as far as we could get from anybody else, because there was water and power there, and we just thought that was the greatest thing. So my folks came over and spent the weekend, brought the rest of my things, and Sunday evening, about dusk, they loaded up and started, and there was just a little better than a 2-track road that, came up to our house. And they started, and we were on the porch waving goodbye, and I watched until I could just see their taillights, and all of a sudden I thought, holy cow, they've left me here. What were they thinking? And it was quite a bit of culture shock, actually. But I helped work cattle once or twice, and we all learned that was not my forte. So I was assigned to the kitchen and chuck wagon duty, and I've continued to do that, some. We don't have to take dinner out, but maybe half a dozen times a year. So it's a lot of fun. I enjoy taking it out and take a lot of pictures of the guys, either they're rounding up or branding or whatever.
I'm a Amarillo girl. I'm from up in the Panhandle. I met Tommy and we got married, and I brought 2 kids with me, and he was the father to them. Natalie's one of them, and they were culture shocked too. We all learned about getting up, cleaning out watering troughs, Brandon, all that different things that we did. And then, like Lou, I'm better in the kitchen than out there, so I do the breakfast and help with the things like that when we work cattle. And it's different. I was a teacher for 15 years. I'm retired now, and so I've learned that what we have out there is the greatest thing to have. It's just I've been blessed with coming here and doing this type of work and raising my family here. It was just the best thing that could happen to me, including him, and stuff like that. So it's a wonderful life, and something that the things that Clabe knows and Tommy knows that are just we're losing them, and it's kind of sad how life is changing, but you can't change that, so we just go on with that. But the leather work that people do, the spurs, all the things that we all treasure, or they're losing those skills in the cities, but that's the way things change.
Well, we're only sons of my parents. Now, our cousin grew up there on the ranch too, Krill Watson now. Her father was Tom Pearson, which was, our dad was John Pearson. They were twin brothers, and they ran the ranch for many years. Yeah, twins is a lot of family history. It goes back many years. That's skipped some generations, which we were. Yeah, I guess we were thankful for. We could have got it out of the way at one time, so we said I'd have two, but we were supposed to be the generation that had another set of twins, and luckily or unluckily, whichever, it skipped our generation. Their mother was, you'd had to know their mother, our grandmother. She was educated at the Boston Conservatory, and very proper, and she was educated in music, could play a piano like just unbelievable, concert style pianist, and we're all about books and stuff. And the Dad and Tom were probably, I think they were 4 or 5 years old at this time, and this back, we're talking about 1923, 24. Pretty safe town. She took them down to the library, let them play out in the yard at the library while she was in doing some research or looking for some books or something. And somebody comes walking up to her, Miss Pearson, you need to go check on your boys. So she walked out, and they had peeled down, buck naked, running around the yard at the library. So, she always told us, and we've heard this many times about twins, that they had their own language. They communicated with each other long before they ever learned to communicate with anyone else. So, and they got it. They at one point they decided their grandmother, my grandmother's mother, which was that her car needed painting one time. So they went down and got a couple of cans of spray paint and proceeded to paint Mucka's car. Their favorite football, they loved to play football, and they played defensive end for the Carlsbad Cavemen. And the story was they were playing Artesia one night, and the Artesia coach asked his running backs, man, what the heck, you're having trouble out there. He said, man, that Pearson guy, he said, that guy's everywhere. He said, they give me the ball, I go around the right end, there's that Pearson guy. He said, they give me the ball, I go around the left end, there's that Pearson guy. Well, the running back didn't realize there were two of them. So they got, then they both joined the Army and went overseas during World War II. Served their duration plus 30 or plus 60, whatever it was that they did at the time, and came back and went right back to the ranch and started taking care of things at the ranch, and stayed there till they died. So C.W. and his brother John, and these are things from memory. There was one point, I don't know which, that they were traveling with a herd of cattle and went through some other people's property or something, a little small farm or something, and this farmer accused them of stealing milk cow or stealing a cow or something from them. And so it ended up going to court. And when they went to court, C.W. and John both came to the court, and the judge asked the man, well, is the man that's standing here, or that you're accusing of stealing the cattle, here today? Yes, I think he is. And so, well, would you point him out? And he looked over there, and there was two of them sitting there, and he couldn't decide on which one was the one that stole the cow, or he could accuse, so the judge was forced to dismiss the case. Now, whether or not they stole the cow or not, I do not have any idea, but
And they were identical.
they were identical twins.
And your father was identical.
My father and our uncle were identical twins. Yes.
Babies dodged a bullet, that's all I want to say.
I think there were more than one tricks played by by our John and Tom on the ladies in their lives too. Growing up, pretty sure.
He, as most brothers do, we didn't get along at all till he went off to college. And then I guess we realized that kind of missed each other, But before then, there was a lot of things that went on. And one time in particular, Clabe aggravated me about something, and it never was my fault. He was always aggravating me, but Mom and Dad were gone, and neighbor kid that lived next to where we lived was an old oil field camp, and there was still another house there that the guy worked for the oil company. So his son was older than us, and every now and then we got to stay home because Robert was at home, the neighbor boy. And so anyway, Robert was there, and Clabe got after me and had me aggravated and had me mad, and I had quite a temper anyway. And so I knew where the keys to the gun closet was, so I get out the .22 and I'm gonna kill him. And I guess I was ready to pull the trigger. And so he knew what I was doing, and so he splits. He gets out of the house, and we have this big, huge high tower, high tank, probably 50 foot off the ground with a big platform on it. And so, unbeknownst to me, he was up on top of that tank hiding from me, and I'm outside with this .22 on the hunt, Well, Robert, the neighbor guy, boy, he finally talks the gun out of me, and we go on and make up. But there was always something like that going on with us when we were growing up. But I'd lived here from basically the time I got out of high school in '79 till '85 or '86 when Jackie and I met. She lived in Amarillo, and so I left here and went up there, and we got married, lived up there 3 years. So basically since probably '79 or '80 we worked together, other than the 3 years I was in Amarillo.
Yeah, see each other pretty much every day.
And he hasn't gotten the 22 out?
Not yet.
Take it on well now.
If we all go, friends gather somewhere, we go to a Christmas party or whatever, all of us, and a lot of times we go together, inevitably, these two will end up in a corner together, just the two of them, just talking like they haven't seen one another in months. But they come home and they don't talk to us that much. So.
You don't have the twin language.
No, it's the refreshments at the parties that make us talk like that. How that all came about, I was on the Hall of Fame board when the idea came up to put the wooden windmill out in front of the Hall of Fame and dedicate it to Sean, because he had the dream of building one himself. I can't remember exactly how it all evolved and whose idea it was or whatever. I think Danny and Libby kind of wanted to do it maybe and approached Bill Sims and I. But anyway, we had an old wooden tower that had an Eclipse motor mill on top of it that was still standing at headquarters. I mean at Northwell down there on the way to headquarters. And we had another mill at a watering we called Cotton that in the same shape, an old wooden tower, and it had fallen down just a few years before that. And so we had Ray Hardy come out and take the one down that we had at Northwell, and we got what metal parts. That was the hardest thing to find on the old wooden mills, was the metal parts. They could rebuild all the wooden stuff, but they had to have the metal parts. And so anyway, it was a big group effort. We gathered up what parts we could and got them over to the man at Ropesville at the time was doing all the work for us, and built the first one, and they had it put up out here. And Bill and I, Calvin Smith, built the water trough that's out there, the rock water trough that's mortared together. And Bill and I built us a little pump to put down in the ground, and we had the idea, and it worked. It's still set up out there to do that, to circulate and pump, and it really does pump. We put the blocks and the cement curbing and everything, tried to make it look as genuine as it could have looked back in the day. And we spent many of an hour out there working on that thing, because we had no idea, I mean, we'd worked on air motor mills all our lives, but anyway, we finally got the thing pumping. But yeah, it was a group effort through the whole neighborhood and through the Hall of Fame, to get all that thing put up and going. And I was telling them earlier on the way to town that I'd been approached whenever the last time this one had torn up, and a couple of years ago, and they were trying to figure out what to do. And so I diverted them toward Danny and Libby. I said, I'd love to see a wooden mill out there. That's what it needs to be there, but I understand that you can't just keep throwing thousands of dollars every time it tears up. Hall of Fame can't afford that. And so anyway, that's kind of where it got to this point. And so it's a really neat deal to see them move it inside to where it'll be preserved and it'll last. And earlier times, these air motor mills that they have now, we change the oil in ours probably once every 2 years. And now with the invention that Gene Milford came up with several years ago, Gene was from Tatum and had Milford Pipe and Supply and invented the poly pumps. And they're supposedly lifetime guarantee on them. Now, I don't know if that means I'm not going to live very long or if that pump's going to last a real long time. I don't know which, but we don't have to work as far as pulling the well hardly at all. And those windmills, the gearbox and everything that's up top, if you maintain it, they'll, I guess, virtually last almost forever. They do wear out, but a lot of those mills that are out there now, we've replaced 4 or 5, I'd say, at the most, and most of them were the original ones that were put up after the wooden windmills, became obsolete when they came out with these air motors, which I would assume was in the 30s, probably started early 30s. And I can remember my dad and our Uncle Tom talking about checking waterings back when they had the wooden windmills. Now we go by and we make sure there's water in the storage tank and water in the troughs. Cattle have salt and mineral, excuse me, whatever. Back then, they kept an oil can on every one of those old wooden windmills, and up there where the bearings are on these, they had a little oil reservoir canister, and they had to crawl every time they went by one. They crawled up on top of it and filled up the oil reservoir with the oil can, and so there was a lot of maintenance, a lot of parts that wore out on those old mills, and there was a lot of maintenance to them back in those days from what they told us.
One deal I might add on the windmills that Tommy's talking about, those old wooden mills, we're talking about maintenance of them. They were what they called a direct stroke mill. And that meant the wheel turned one time, the pump rod made one pass. So as these new mills have a gearbox in them, and they're geared down to where the wheel turns about 2 1/3 times to one stroke of the which is a lot easier on equipment. You can imagine the strength of winds everybody knows about these old mills being able to withstand that. And you can imagine how fast that rod's going up and down if it was going at one per revolution of the wheel. He was making one full stroke. So.
Libby was I do remember, Tommy, Libby was telling me one time about they have to pull a windmill, and a lot of times, she would have to help Danny. And she said, you learn a lot of signals from your husband when you're pulling a windmill. And she was warning me about all this, how you're supposed to behave and what you're supposed to know when they do this or when they do this or all that. So I thought that was pretty interesting, that how Libby was right there with Danny when he'd have to pull a windmill. And I know there's a story about Dan and a windmill.
That's Sean's granddad.
Sean's granddad. What was
he?
I'm gonna let Tommy tell. Okay.
Dan Berry, which Danny's dad, Sean's granddad, he had a little place out there east of Eunice leased. And Dan was always real mechanical minded in much way Sean was, but and he could do a lot of stuff by himself. And he was going to take this mill down out there at that place east of town, and he rigged him up a gin pole that stuck up taller than the mill where he could tie on to the gearbox and pick it up with his block and tackle with his pickup. Had him a flatbed trailer parked out there, parked beside the windmill tower. Well, he got it picked up and off of there and got it laid down on that flatbed trailer. And he was so proud of himself, and he was probably at least in his 60s, maybe 70 or early 70s when he did this all by himself. And he was so proud of himself for doing all that. And so he was going to back his pickup up a ramp back up to the flatbed trailer to hook on. He forgot to take his cable loose from his block and tackle, and he just folded the top of that windmill tower down about the top fourth or third of it, just 90 degrees. and you'd have to known Dan, if he was talking to one of his friends that was a woman, he'd say, "What are you doing, you old broad?" And if he was talking to one of us, "Hey, you little bastard," and that's what he called us. Well, Bill Sims happened to come down this windmill wasn't half a mile off of the Hobbs Jowl Highway out there east of Eunice. Bill Sims happened to come driving along and saw that windmill tower out there folded over, and so he pulls in to see what's going on and catches Dan in the act. And you see all the evidence is there, and Dan would be they'd be laughing and giving him a hard time about that story, and Bill was there. Dan said nobody'd ever known it if that little bastard hadn't have drove up. It varies, but most of our bigger pastures, which vary from 20 to 30 sections, we have one pasture that we're in right now that has as few as 3 waterings, and other ones can have maybe 5, so, watering can water probably 10 sections worth, or probably 5 sections worth of cattle is that's kind of the ideal thing in our country, where you got lots of cattle to spread, lots of countries spread cattle over. As far as the team ropings at Giles Lee's, I'd say that was probably Clabe and mine's first association with roping, and we got to rope a lot. We were very fortunate to grow up with an arena. Dad and Tom always had roping cattle, but they would go to Giles Lee's, and they never did get to rodeo very much when they were young like we did. They rode a few bucking horses and things, and then after we were grown and kind of doing things on our own, well, they had time enough to team rope a little bit, and they got to do it then. But we were very fortunate to get an early start at that, and Giles's was one of the places that I don't say we learned a lot about actually roping, because we would just go with them, but there was, it was like all of our neighbors and people from Tatum and everywhere would go to Giles's roping, and everybody's kids would come. So, and we'd sit on the back. We'd go get a rope out of our dad's trunk. Everybody drove a car back then, used their own vehicles, and had a car and a bumper pull trailer, and we'd get a rope out of their trunk and fashion us a breakaway, unthread it and fashion us a breakaway rope with a piece of baling wire, and sit back there on the fence post with the rope tied to the fence. And when the steers would come out of the arena, we'd rope them, and I don't know how none of us ever got our fingers cut off or arm cut off or what, but anyway, that was kind of our first introduction into seeing any kind of competition roping, and we weren't even involved in it really, but we got all those kids that were there was what we grew up going to junior rodeos with later. It was just kind of another way of life other than the ranching. That was their entertainment, their hobby, their good times. So.
Well, we started out in the junior rodeos, and when I don't know 8, 10 years old, and went all the way through. I went to college 4 years in rodeo. Tommy went to college for a year and hated her. Did you go a full year or a semester? He hated school worse.
Total, I probably went a year.
Yeah, and didn't get a.
Two schools I made it. I probably, if you combine it, if it was a cumulative, it was
probably a year. I went my 4 years, never got any kind of degree, never intended to get any kind of degree. Just went and rodeoed and come home and had always roped kids. And then when our cousin married Guy Allen, well, got us introduced into single steer roping, which then we got Tommy really started on it. And Tommy went to finals, what, 3 times, 4 times? And I ended up getting my card and going roping steers, and just till you went broke doing it, basically. And, you know,
Guy owes both of us about $500,000.
yeah, it's a blast. It was a lot of fun. I got to go a lot of places I'd always dreamed of going, you know, like going to Cheyenne and Pendleton and places like that. Just really things I'd only thought, you know, I never would see, but I actually got to go to them, and we really enjoyed it. Really blessed to do that. But along with the ranching life and the neighbors, and you know, it doesn't matter if you actually, what we call neighboring is helping each other, you know, brandings and shipping the falls or whatever we need to get done. And even guys you're not, that you don't neighbor with, they're just your friends. They're just good. You know, you can count on them just like the ones that you're helping all the time. And it's real strange. I've learned since the oil field's gotten so big out here, and after Dad passed away and I started having to deal with it, that the oil field didn't like that. You cannot get 2 oil companies to agree to fix a cattle guard. They think somebody's going to get $1 more than the other guy. They cannot get along with each other, and that's very hard for me to comprehend, because even if a guy, it doesn't matter who that guy is that's in the ranching industry. Any guy in the ranching industry is going to do whatever he can to help him. If he gets in a bind, he needs some help, they're going to do something to do. Just like right now, we're going to send some money to Amarillo. All these fires, y'all heard about the fires in Amarillo. It's terrible. Some people have lost their lives trying to save cattle, and we're going to send some money to some. Hell, we don't even know who it's going to, but we're going to send some money to them. We don't have time to, you know, there's people around there that's hauling hay and hauling fence panels and doing a lot of stuff for them. We don't have the time to do that, but we're going to, you know, try to do our part to help them. And it's real strange to see that happen, and then go try to deal with somebody in the oil field. They'd get in a fist fight before they'd help each other, I think. But
You asked about the neighborhood, and I would say without any reservation, I don't care what neighborhood you lived in or grew up in, ours is better. How much country would you say what we call our neighborhood encompasses? 25 square miles, or
our neighborhood?
Yeah, and that's, you know, everyone says, you know, because they know where we live, and we say something about the neighborhood, and they're like,
You're talking
neighborhood? You know, what neighborhood?
Well, you're talking
But
more close to 1,000 sections. You know, if you go
yeah,
down 1,000 square miles area, that, you know, the Smiths and the Berries and Myers and you know, and Angels and Snyders and Coopers and you know, all around. You can probably put 1,000 square miles, I'd say, there.
but we know without reservation that if we need something, you know, if there's a big deal, and you know, one of the biggest is one of the worst, but one of the biggest was when we lost Sean, and you know, we just all know what we have to do. You know, you just know what you have to do for your neighbors, and do it gladly and willingly, and knowing that if the roles were reversed, it would be exactly the same. And we're always, that's one of mine and Libby's favorite things is, you know, yeah, we have the best neighborhood. And Nancy Smith, you know, Nancy and Bill Smith, who now they live in Lovington, but they're still our neighbors. You know, they'll always still be our neighbors.
They didn't get
And,
out from under it just 'cause
yeah.
they moved it down.
Yeah. You don't, you have to die out of it, you know, you don't get to move out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, Mom was the historian, as I've said. She could tell you the family tree. The family tree reaches across this room. I've got it folded up in one full drawer. That's just the family tree, and it rolls out all across the deal. And she could. Yeah, there's a few forks in it. We don't. It's just not one tree. But she could tell you who was so and so's kid and when, and who married who and when, and you know, she just really kept all that together. And she's was all about the history, and plus, the history of the family and the history of the ranch, even beyond prior to the family, which I was talking about earlier about how the ranch got into the family. And and then Dad, he taught us how to work. It's like I was going to say a while ago when we were talking about family. Everybody had a job. Well, nowadays it's a little different, but back in as late as in the 50s and 60s, your family had, it took everybody to keep a ranch going. When something's going on, the wife and the kids, they all had to have a part in it, and we learned that from our dad. And not so much anymore. It's things are more mechanical, and roads are built everywhere. We don't have to ride horses near as far as we used to. We can get around in trailers. And but yeah, he is very taught us a lot of ethics and work ethics. Whatever but that is a great family, and still is. We're still proud of what we have, and hope to maintain it. It's getting tougher and tougher by the day, but we're hoping to maintain it for Natalie and her, that generation and generations on. So maybe it'll work.
There was nobody any prouder than Billy Pearson of the heritage and the legacy. But one year for Christmas, she gave Jackie and I both a little pillow that I carry in my car to this day that says, "Behind every good rancher is a wife who works in town."
We were around Tom, our uncle. Him and Dad ran the ranch together, and so we were around both of them a lot. But we learned from just by growing up around them and the way they operated to take things lightly. They had a good time. It didn't matter if they were at the Saturday night dance or the team roping, or if they were up on the top of a windmill having lots of trouble and not being able to get it fixed. They had a good time, whatever they did, and they passed that on to us and our kids as well. You don't let anything get you down, so keep going. And Natalie didn't really go into it, but we just hired her full time this first of this year, and her husband Bradley hired him full time to help on the oil field end of it. And then we have plans to bring Clabe and Luann's oldest daughter and her husband in kind of in the same capacity, him in the oil field end, and Maggie as their daughter is to help us on the ranch, and to try to continue to get it handed down, keep it in the family, And another thing about Luann and Jackie, and soon to be Natalie, living out there, they're only the second generation of women to live on the ranch. Our aunt and our mom was the first women to actually live full time on the ranch. The rest of them always had houses in town, and the men. No, the men just lived at the ranch, and they hired a cook. Yeah, and they always had a cook hired that lived out there and keep the house and cook and everything, and the women did whatever they did in town. So.
I'd just like to thank the Hall of Fame and museum for what they're doing for the ranch and heritage in Lee County. It's it's a lot. It wasn't that many years ago, wasn't that many generations ago, that 90% of the people you knew lived and worked outside of a town, or had something to do with the land. And it's that you might not know 10% of the people that or maybe not even that many that actually live and work outside of a town or some kind of job in town. And the education that kids can get just by coming to this museum and the things that they put on is really, really good, and I'm just thank them for it.